Hello friends, welcome back to my channel. My name is Amelia and today we are jumping straight into my reading journal. We're going to be looking at all of the books that I read in January, and I know this is a little bit late. It's now like February 20th, but better late than never, right? Yeah, so we are jumping straight into the reading journal, as I said, because I have a lot of footage to get through today. I have like 5.5 hours of footage, so even with speeding it up, I usually do about 1,000%, which is kind of insane. I still have 33 minutes, so I will do my best to cut that down. But if you do enjoy this video, please go ahead and consider giving it a like, because as I've said, it took quite a bit of effort, as the 5.5 hours is only the filming time and does not include all of the penciling in time. But yeah, we are going to be continuing with the sort of paper cut theme that I went for in January. Feel free to check out the video where I set this theme up if you haven't seen it already. But we are starting with the, of course, month in review page and my pages read trackers. These are pages that I have been doing every month for a while now, and I really like how they give you a good sort of overview of the month. I had a really good reading month, finishing 7 books. To be fair, one of them I had like very few pages left, and I finished it like a couple hours after the new year started, but I'm counting it anyway, although it won't be in this setup because I did set up a page for it in my last year's reading journal. So yeah, it's in the pages read, but it's not going to have its own spread. So yeah, just keep that in mind. We will be skipping it. If you want to see the spread for that, you'll have to check out December's reads it should be in from last year's reading journal. So I would say the spreads have a different level of success in terms of how well the paper cut sort of theme worked. Some are better than others, but I think overall the effect is interesting. So let's go ahead and take a look at the first book that I read in 2024, Rise of the Ranger. So Rise of the Ranger is book 1 of 9 of a self-published series by Philip C. Quaintrell, and I actually only ended up giving this book 3 out of 5 stars. I will admit that I was a bit disappointed by it. I had seen the series talked about and recommended on BookTube. I forget who exactly I saw talking about it, but I was excited for it. It's like, they gave it a good review. I'm going to check it out. However, I found the writing to be a bit lacking and much of the content to be quite derivative. In terms of the writing, there just were quite a few awkward passages and the dialogue felt quite stilted in places, making it hard for me to connect with the characters or find their conversations like natural. And the character work, it was decent for the most part, but I think you can tell that he put more work into some characters than others, which, I mean, makes sense. You're going to put more effort into main characters and characters that you really like, but I would have liked to see them generally a bit more well-rounded. I liked the character of the Ranger, but some of the choices he makes are just quite strange, especially when he's like completed the job that he was paid to do, and then he just stays on, and even he doesn't really know why. He just like suddenly is like, oh, it's kind of nice to have friends. And to me, it just came across as the author like couldn't come up with a good reason to make him stay, but he needed him to stay for the sake of the plot. I think a man who had been on his own all of these years, meeting people and realizing how lonely he has been, could have been a compelling characterization, but with the way it was written, it just really fell short, and it felt quite lazy on the author's part to just like not even actually fully come up with the reason that he's staying and doing these things. I just feel like the author should know their character better than that, and it just, felt like the characterization wasn't totally there, or at least it didn't match with what he needed it to do, what he needed to happen for the plot. From a world building POV, as I said, I found it very derivative. Now, of course, most fantasy books share some elements or tropes, but I found myself reading about some element or another and being like, oh, that's from X book, or that's from Y book. So, like, for example, the Ranger character himself comes across as very Geralt of Rivia, although he does have like a different characterization, like in terms of his personality, I mean, to an extent, but he is a deadly trained fighter who went to this fortress in a secret location to learn from others of the order, and now he's a lone wolf traveling around on his own, taking contracts for money, and he even carries a steel and a silver sword for killing monsters. So it's very, yeah, it's really giving Geralt, and we even have like this wizard school tower thing that really reminds me of Aretuza from Witcher. And then additionally, we of course have the elves who've been pushed aside as the power of men grows, and that's a pretty common plot element in fantasy. You know, have like the older race that was like greater at some point and has diminished in power as the strength of men goes. It's pretty common, so it's not specifically deriving from one thing, although it does also feature in Lord of the Rings and Tad Williams' Austin Ard world. Looking at the Austin Ard reference, the elves have this leader figure who goes all evil, which does remind me a little bit of the Storm King from Austin Ard, but more than that, he kind of gives Dark One from Wheel of Time vibes, especially since he's like trapped in this sealed prison, but he's got some evil disciples who are still in the regular world, and they remind me a lot of the Forsaken, even down to like fighting amongst themselves to be the favored servant. So there are many elements that aren't unique, but yes, that is most fantasy. And despite the flaws, I did find this book interesting. So I'm going to continue the series, and I have hope that the writing and sort of cohesiveness of the world building will improve as the series goes. After that, I read Gathering Storm, book 12 of The Wheel of Time. This is the first one that is written by both Robert Jordan and Brandon Sanderson, who of course picked up writing Wheel of Time after Robert Jordan's unfortunate death. So I gave this one 5 stars. And when I was reviewing the like what happened in this book to write the review, because I didn't write it right away, I waited until like the later, so I kind of forgot what happened in it. So I went to look it up, and I learned that apparently this was supposed to be part of Memory of Light, in addition to Towers of Midnight and Memory of Light, which would have been like an actually insane book. It's even worse than Green Angel Tower, which is also sometimes split into parts when it's published, like it's split into 2 parts, but this book would have been like 2,000 pages long. So I think it's good that they split it up. And I also think that like the way this book ended was just like perfect with the items that like it resolves and how it sets us up for the upcoming finale. So it really does feel like it's intended to be its own book. So we focus mostly on Rand and Egwene in this installment. Obviously, I can't really say much about what they're doing, as that's big spoilers for the first 11 books, but Rand's character development in this one was amazing. Like, as we've gone through the story, and this is like kind of like maybe slight spoilers, but I wouldn't be super worried about it. I'm not going to say specific plot points, but Rand has tried to become harder and harder because he thinks that's what he has to do in order to make it through to Tarmon Gaidon. But we see, like, through him and through other characters' perspectives, that what he's been doing has actually been working against him and making him kind of lose his way. And we have this super tense like finale where he almost loses it, essentially. And I won't tell you how this plays out because spoilers, but it's so good. I really loved it. I really felt it. It made sense, and also, yeah, it's hard to sort of describe it without spoiling it. But if you're reading Wheel of Time, this is definitely a moment to look forward to. I really liked it. Egwene's storyline also continues to be one of my favorites. I think she is probably Jordan's best female character. A lot of the others, I just have problems with the way Jordan treats them or has them act, like specifically when it comes to men. But I do like Egwene's strength and her like sense of self and how centered she is in what she wants and who she is. I will say I'm not fond of how Jordan seems to need to pair everybody up. Like, not everybody needs to find a romantic partner, but he has this potential one for Egwene, which I won't discuss because spoilers, obviously. But I personally just think that she doesn't need one, and I wish she would just get to be single and do her own thing and be an example of women who don't need no man, essentially. But overall, it was an absolutely stunning entry. It has me really excited to continue the series. And I think that Sanderson does a really good job blending his work in with Jordan's. After that, I read Emily Wilde's Encyclopaedia of Fairies, and I gave this one this is going to be maybe a controversial take, but only 3 out of 5 stars. So I really liked the concept of a fairy naturalist, but I think in execution, this book was a little disappointing. I was personally expecting it to focus more on small fairy types, like the kind of household type, but it went into the like ACOTAR style fae, or at least what I think they are like, because I never read that book, but like the human sized and kind of like looking fae. And while she did do a good job of making the like human like fae different and unhuman, inhuman, I don't know, they still do come across very human adjacent. So if you're interested in that type of fae, you will probably quite enjoy this book, but it just wasn't what I personally was hoping for. So it wasn't quite up my alley, I would say. And I also would have liked more sort of sciencey things. It felt like the story got kind of hijacked by the whole like white tree plot line, and sometimes it felt like we forgot she was there to do science. I did like the science elements that we got. I just wanted more, and I really would have liked the book to include excerpts from her encyclopedia so far. Like as fairy types are mentioned, perhaps I think it would have added that scientific element that I felt was lacking and helped show us that she actually like does know what she's talking about, as well as being a good vehicle for world building because it would allow the author to essentially like knowledge dump, but in an interesting way. I also felt that the romance element was not my favorite, and a couple spoilers here, so maybe just skip the rest of this review if you don't want any spoilers. But they've kind of had this like Emily Wilde and the other main character who shows up, the man. They've kind of had this like maybe sort of secret crush going on a while, and then he just like asks her to marry him, and she's like, "Yeah, that seems good." And I think she actually does say yes in the end. I forget, but like sure they've known each other for a while, but there's a difference between like knowing each other as friends and knowing each other as like romantic partners. Like compatibility in one does not guarantee in the other. So essentially what I'm saying is there should be like some sort of courtship, like dating perhaps, before you're just like, yeah, let's just jump into marriage. Like I get maybe him asking because he's Faye, so he does like weird shit, but her, like, girl, what are you doing? And yeah, all in all, I just think I'm a bit out of the target demographic for this one. I think it's intended for a more YA type audience. So if that's you, definitely check it out. But if you read a lot of adult fantasy, I think you could probably skip this one. I don't think it's necessarily going to be up your alley. Then I read Bookshops and Bone Dust by Travis Baldry, and I gave this one 4.5 out of 5 stars. This is the prequel to Legends and Lattes, and this might be an unpopular opinion, but I think Bookshops and Bone Dust was slightly better than Legends and Lattes. Personally, I just think that the plot gives that little bit more, and I know that the point of cozy fantasy is like no plot, just vibes, but personally, I do like a little bit of plot. I also thought that the plot elements of this one were more compelling and interesting, and though I liked the side characters in Legends and Lattes, I think some of the ones in Bookshops and Bone Dust are more interesting to me personally. The bookshop vibes are also immaculate, and I love the scenes of them working on restoring the shop and trying to find ways to increase like the patronage. Yeah. Viv's characterization was also really good in this one. I think Baldry was able to really effectively create an earlier version of Viv who we can see how she becomes Viv from Legends and Lattes, but she isn't quite that person yet. She's younger and still kind of finding her place in the world. And I think it also kind of shows like where she may have gotten some of her inspiration for the coffee shop project too, like with her work in the bookshop. I would say the one element I didn't enjoy, and it's probably the reason I didn't give it 5 stars, was the sort of little romance side plot. Like initially we meet the love interest and she's calling Viv, I forget what she's calling her, but it's like one of those pet names you'd expect from like an older lady grandma type. And then this love interest is a bit older than Viv, but I guess like not crazy amount older, but I could not get over my initial assumption that she was like significantly older and that it was like a grandmotherly type relationship. And the whole thing to me just felt very awkward, which I guess was partly the point, as it's like a first love type of thing. But I just think the writing in the romance sections was a bit awkward and I wasn't buying it. I didn't care for them together. And yeah, that was the thing that kind of took this book down a little bit. But luckily, there weren't too many of the sort of romance scenes, so it didn't ruin the book for me or anything. And I definitely think that you should check this one out. Next, I read Natural History of Dragons by Marie Brennan, and I gave this one 5 stars. Quite a good reading month, lots of highly rated books. And for me, this book is a far superior version of the naturalist character that we see in Emily Wilde's Encyclopaedia of Fairies. Our main character, Isabel, is a very full and fleshed out feeling character with all the quirks, shortcomings, and strengths that come along with that and with being like a person. I found her to be a very interesting and compelling character, and I think the manner of the storytelling really helps with that. It's told as a memoir, so we get an interesting perspective of her much later in her life, reflecting on what she's done in her life with the knowledge that she has now of how what she's doing will reflect on her later and like impact her later decisions or life. I think the writing is quite good in this book. She manages to make language feel appropriate to the time she's trying to recreate, which is like a Victorian England sort of expired world, except for she's kind of reskinned it and created some slightly sort of different politics, but it's very sort of like Victorian Europe vibes. But she manages to recreate the language and stuff without it feeling stuffy and dated, which I think sometimes happens in historical inspired books. I have to say, I was a bit surprised that, okay, and this is going to be spoilers, so maybe skip to the next book if you don't want any. But I was a bit surprised that she actually killed off Jacob after their relationship like got so good. But I suppose it frees Isabel to kind of do whatever she wants in the future without having to fight against him, and it lets it end with them being happy together, I guess, which is nice for them. And I think the plot was interesting and well paced. It did feel more on the character focused end to me, which is totally fine with me. I do love some good character work, but if you like a plottier book, you might find this a little slow, but it's still only like 350 odd pages. So I will say this book is definitely more targeted towards women, which of course is most of the people who watch my videos. But if you are a man, I do recommend that you perhaps give this a try. But if you start to feel like you don't get it, just understand that you are not the target audience. Anyway, that's A Natural History of Dragons. Then I finally finished Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer, which I gave 5 stars. I listened to this one on audiobook, and it is narrated by the author, I believe, which made it really, I would say, like kind of, I like it when they're narrated by the author. It makes it feel more, I don't know, you could tell they are more familiar with the topic, I think, and are more invested, like with nonfiction specifically. I haven't really listened to any fiction on audiobook, but yeah, I highly recommend nonfiction when it's narrated by the author. Personally, I just find that to be one of the best ways to listen to it. But anyway, I very thoroughly enjoyed Braiding Sweetgrass. It was probably one of my favorite nonfiction books that I've read so far. I just found her writing to be very evocative. Nonfiction is not really where I was expecting to find such good descriptive writing, and it probably helps that so many of like the little moments or feelings that she was describing were familiar to me. So like the feel of corn leaves or gathering wild berries, fighting a raspberry bush for those sweet ripe berries. And I could just like imagine myself very vividly in these scenarios that she's describing. But aside from the good descriptions, I also think that the message and content of this book is really important for everybody. Kimmerer did a really good job of, for me at least, conjuring childhood memories and associating them to the issues at hand. And of course, this is mostly talking about, she's looking at sort of overconsumption and the exploitation of the natural world through an indigenous lens. And I think it's a really effective way for her to back up her arguments and sway people. I also learned a lot about indigenous cultures in this book, and those were really interesting insights. And I definitely think that you should give this one a listen and take maybe some of the things she says to heart, because it is up to all of us to find a way to make our world live on, essentially, and reduce our consumption. But that is Braiding Sweetgrass. And then the final book that I read in January was Towers of Midnight, which I gave 5 stars again. And this is book 13 of Wheel of Time by Robert Jordan and Brandon Sanderson. This was another banger Wheel of Time entry. We continue moving towards the last battle and working through the various problems and plot points that we have to sort of deal with in order to get there. It still feels like we have a lot to deal with, like specifically with the Ciancian. I have no idea how all that is going to work out in respect to like their prophecies. Like, of course, it's possible that they won't be fulfilled, but so far the series has handled prophecies by having them all be fulfilled, like in some way or another. So I think it would just be against that and feel like too easy if they just like weren't fulfilled somehow. The thing I love about being so far into a series is I'm so familiar with the characters, and I think this installment continued to build upon the established characterizations and reveal new elements of them as I deal with, the stresses of the upcoming end of the world, potentially. The retrieval of spoilers. The retrieval of Moraine from the tower is interesting, and I'm intrigued to see what effects this is going to have on our characters and the events of the final book, Memories of Light. But that is everything that I read in the month of January. I hope you have enjoyed this video. Let me know in the comments what books you've read so far this year. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.